All right, good evening. We are continuing our trek through Maseches Menachos, nearing the end of the sixth parak. We still have a couple of days left, so we'll enjoy it. We are sponsored for the month by Jeff and Chava Bela Wald, Le'ilu Nishmas, Jeff's father, Mr. Roman Wald, Avram ben Shmuel, Zichron Levracha, and his grandfather, Mr. Menachem Eisner, Menachem Mendel, ben Mordechai, Zichron Levracha, whose yard sites were on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. May their neshamos have in Leah. And we are also sponsored for the month by Shmuli and Miriam Fuchs, Le'ilu Nishmas Shmuli's mother, Bela Yenta Bas Chuna, Zichron Levracha, whose yard site is on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. May her neshama have in Aliyah. We are continuing on with the questions of the Korban HaOmer and the Shtei HaLechem. We had learned that the Korban HaOmer was the barley offering that was brought, and when it was brought in the Beis HaMikdash, or at least on the day that it was brought in the Beis HaMikdash, it permitted everybody outside of the Beis HaMikdash to eat all of the new grain. And then there was another Korban called the Shtei HaLechem, and when we brought the 2 loaves of bread, the Shtei HaLechem on Shavuos, together with those sheep, then the new grain was permitted in the Beis HaMikdash as well. So here's the question, 4 questions. Boy, Rabbi Bar Chama asks the following question. Shtei HaLechem, ma'u she'atir shelo kesidron. Can the lechem, Shtei HaLechem, work out of order? Meaning, normally the way that you're allowed to use the new grain in the Beis HaMikdash is, first the grain is in existence and the Korban HaOmer comes. That's the second day of Pesach. Then you wait 7 weeks and then you have the Shtei HaLechem. So it's a 2-step process. The grain is partially permitted through the Korban HaOmer and then fully permitted by the Shtei HaLechem. We know that that's the case because the grain becomes partially permitted. We learned yesterday that if b'di'eved, you brought a Korban with the new grain after the Korban HaOmer, it is valid, it's not invalid. So, Hechidami, how could that be? If Pesach comes before Shavuos, how could you wind up going out of order and getting to the Shtei HaLechem first? So the answer is, Kegon dezar'inhu bein ha'omer l'shtei HaLechem. What if a person plants wheat after Pesach and it grows before Shavuos, during that 7-week period? So, v'cholif alayhu shtei HaLechem, so omer, Shtei HaLechem ve'omer. And now, because the first Yom Tov that it comes up upon is the Shtei HaLechem, and then comes the Korban HaOmer after that, right? Because the first Korban, the first thing that it hits is Shavuos.
Isn't the Shtei HaLechem the Shavuos Korban?
The Shtei HaLechem is the Shavuos Korban. So therefore, since it was grown between Pesach and Shavuos, the first Korban that is around is the Shtei HaLechem is going to come first.
Do you keep that aside until Shavuos comes?
What, the wheat?
Or
all the new grain, you don't use it in the Beis HaMikdash. People are allowed to eat it, but in the Beis HaMikdash, you weren't using it yet. So now the question is, right, after the wheat, right, in the Beis HaMikdash, right, if the wheat now has gone through a Shtei HaLechem, and then the following year it goes through an Omer, right, so can you use it immediately in the Beis HaMikdash? It's considered old? Or do you have to wait till the next Shtei HaLechem because you need an Omer and then a Shtei HaLechem? So basically, you know it's a 2-step process. But can the Shtei HaLechem come first? That's the question. So what is the halacha? Kisidron sharyon. Is it that you need it in order? You need a Shtei HaLechem first, that partially permits it, and then you need an Omer that partially permits it, and then the Shtei HaLechem finishes the job. Shelo kisidron lo sharyon, and if it's not in the right order, it doesn't work. O dilma shelo kisidron nami sharyon. Or do we say all you need is both of those korbanos? Therefore, if the Shtei HaLechem comes first and then the Korban Omer comes next, that will be effective. Right? So that's the question. Amar Rabba says, Toshma, come and learn the answer from a Braisa. Pasuk says in Vayikra, Vim takriv minchas bikurim, if you are going to be bringing a mincha of the first fruits. So, which is the mincha of the first fruits? That is b'minchas omer kasav medaber. That is talking about the Korban HaOmer. It comes from the first fruits being produce, right? The first grain is barley. That's the Korban HaOmer in last week's parsha. So, mehechon ba'a. What kind of grain do you bring that with? That's minas orid. You bring that from barley. Ata omer ha'se'orin, you say means barley, o ein ela min hachitin. Doesn't say in the pasuk, barley. So maybe it's supposed to be wheat. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Nemar aviv b'mitzrayim v'nemar aviv ledoros. The answer is, we've got a gzera shava of the word aviv. When it comes to, by makas barad, right, the plague of hail, which comes in Mitzrayim, it says that the pishta and the se'ora, the flax and the barley were in the fields, and it got destroyed by the barad.
And burned. Got burnt to those.
That's correct. Yes. V'nemar aviv ledoros. And then, by talking about the Korban HaOmer, it says, V'im takriv minchas bikur Hashem, then it continues on, aviv kolui ba'esh, it's aviv. So what does aviv mean? Ma aviv ha'amor b'mitzrayim se'orin, just like aviv in Mitzrayim is talking about barley, af aviv hamor ledoros se'orin. So too, the aviv that is for all time for the Korban HaOmer is barley. Rabbi Akiva says, I will tell you the source. Matzinu yachid shemevi chovaso min hachitin. We have found that an individual can bring a korban from wheat, right? For a person can bring a minchas chote, for example, right? It comes from wheat. And chovaso min hase'orin. He could also have an obligation to bring a korban that's barley. For example, the minchas sota. Minchas sota is barley, right? So that could be, as we said, Rashi brings there, that she has acted as a maisa behema, so therefore her korban is ochel behema.
If you didn't have barley, could you give you something to...
No, you have to bring what is required. Ve'im ve'tzibor shemevi'in chovasim mechitin. And we also know there's a circumstance where the community has to bring an offering that is made out of wheat. Like, for example, the shtei halechem korban, right? Shtei halechem is made from wheat. And mevi'in chovasan min hase'orin. So therefore, it makes sense that there must be an offering that is being brought from barley, because it parallels. Just as by individuals you can bring from wheat and from barley, so to the korban tzibor has to be from wheat and from barley. Now, where is there a korban that it doesn't specify? The answer is the korban ha'omer. Must be the korban ha'omer is brought from barley. V'matza omer ba min hachitin, because if you would say that it was coming from the wheat, lo matzinu tzibor shemevi chovasim min hase'orin, you couldn't find another korban that would have been brought from barley. So therefore, that's how you know. Davar acher, another way of learning it. Imata omer bar min hachitin, if you would say that the omer comes from wheat, ein shtei halechem bikurim, then the shtei halechem couldn't be called first fruits. Right? In other words, you need barley to be the first, and then you need the shtei halechem to be the first. How could the omer be first and the shtei halechem be first when the shtei halechem comes afterwards? The answer is they're two different types of grain. Right? One is the first grain altogether. The other is the first time you're using wheat. And that's how you solve that. Now, v'im isa de shtei halechem shelo kisidron sharyon. If it was true, let's go according to what, now we're going to answer a question. If it was true that the shtei halechem could work out of order, right? That the shtei halechem could come first, and then the barley, the omer could come second. So then, what kind of answer is the davar acher? The davar acher is the shtei halechem can never be a first korban because it is coming after the barley, but the korban haomer. But it doesn't have to, according to this. If the grain grew between after the korban haomer, then sometimes it might be the first korban. Right? Mishkachas, so there says Mishkachas law, de makriv omer mehanach de ashrish kodem l'shtei halechem ubasar omer de ishtakid. You could wind up having a circumstance where you could have a omer, right? You could that you're bringing the omer from that which you can bring. It could be wheat, but it could be wheat that grew before the shtei halechem, and now it went through the shtei halechem and the korban haomer, and now it can be brought, right? Before last year. So shtei halechem mehanach de ashrif kodem laomer dehashto basar shtei halechem dishtakid. You could have a shtei halechem being brought from something that was, and the shtei halechem could also be brought. The shtei halechem could be the bikurim if it was grown before the korban haomer, and then now it's permissible. So you need basically the wheat needs two things. So sometimes the korban haomer is the first, and you could also have the shtei halechem be the first. It all just depends which one is the first Yom Tov, right? Because you could have it one way or the other way. So it must be that it doesn't work out of order. Okay. Now, mi savart bikurim lepera kamrinon. One second. It doesn't. Who says that doesn't? That what's going on here is that the bikurim, the first that it's talking about, is the first time that fruit is being used. right? Lemizbeach kamrin. We're not talking about the first time. So in other words, your question is, how could it possibly be? So we have the first. We mean the first time barley is being used, the first time wheat's being used, and now we can come up with a way that the wheat is being used for the first time. That's not the point. It's not that the product is being used for the first time. It's lemizbeach kamrin. It's the mizbeach that's being used for the first time. Ha'achil lemizbeach miperi dehashata. We're saying it's the first time the mizbeach is being used for the first fruits of this year. That can never happen by the shtei halechem, right? If you get to the shtei halechem, that if it's not the first produce, if it's not if the korban ha'omer is not barley, then the wheat that's being brought, and it was being brought, then you're always using wheat from you're not using it from the new year. You'd always be using last year's wheat. So therefore, it's the mizbeach, from the perspective of the mizbeach.
Was there a certain way how they clean the mizbeach after each korban?
We have not discussed any cleaning process, other than the Trumas Hadeshim, which we have not discussed yet. Okay, so now, Boy Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama asked the following question: Shtei alechem. Okay, so that was the first question. So we see that it does not work out of order, right? It must work only in order. Now, Boy Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama asks we can't answer. We don't answer that, right? In other words, we thought we might have been able to answer it, but the point is, it's not talking about the first of the fruits. It's talking about the first time the mizbeach is being used, and so therefore, the question of the ode that Rabbi Akiva brings is valid anyway, even if it was both times wheat. So therefore, we don't have an answer to Rabbi Rechama's question. Okay, fine. So we leave that was question number one. Question number two, we don't answer these questions. Question number two, Boy Rami Bar Chama, Rabbi Rechama's second question. Shtei alechem, the two loaves of bread, right? Hanotza sharya o chanota sharya. Sorry, yeah. After the two loaves of bread that you bring, so after that, you're now bringing the new produce to the Beis Hamikdash. One of the requirements is you bring the first fruits of the 7 species, called Bikurim, and you bring that as a gift to the Kohanim, you bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. So, all the fruit, it has to be fruit that was blossoming, that was growing before the Shtei Alechem, right? So now, there's 2 different times that you can look at a leaf and determine that it's blossoming. One is called the Hanotza, and one is called the Chanota. Hanotza is when the flower falls off, and you're left with the bud. And
in the fall time, that's what happens. In the fall.
This is going to happen in the springtime, a little bit after the spring, right? That's when the fruits are coming out, right? You don't want your fruit blossoming in the fall because they'll all die on the tree in the winter, right? So this is already the springtime when things are blossoming in the spring, and then the blossoms fall off and the fruit grows. So that's what hanotza is. Chanota is when the fruit comes out. The fruit is already visible. So do you need the fruit to be visible or just the blossom to fall? So my hanotza, my chanota.
You need the blossom to fall, because that's when you make the bracha.
So which is it? So my hanotza, my chanota. So which hanotza and chanota are we talking about? Ilema hanotza de pera vechanota de pera. If we're talking about it's when the hanotza, when the fruit is sprouting, and the chanota is the blossoming of the fruit on the tree. So then hashta, hashrosha sharya, so the omer is permitting all of the grain that took root. Hanotza v'chanota mibai. So then, obviously, the hanotza would be just as valid as the chanota. Why? Because even that is following the process of the product taking root, right? So the omer, right, and the shtei alechem is going to permit the omer, and the shtei alechem is going to permit any wheat grain that took root before the korban ha'omer was brought. So the hanotza and the chanota, right, is a later stage. For sure, the shtei alechem is going to permit that, both of those. So they're not asking the question: is the hanotza enough in that circumstance? Ella, what we're asking is hanotza de ole v'chanota de ole. We're asking whether the buds of the new leaves are coming out. So this is even an earlier step in the process. Mihavi ki hashrasha olo. Is the process of the leaves starting to sprout, is that considered, we start to look at the leaves now on the trees, right? Is that considered to be, the leaves starting to sprout, is that considered to be like the equivalent of roots taking hold, right? Because when it comes to grain, the crop, the plant is a plant. It grows and dies every year, right? So it grows and takes root. But a tree, the roots are staying. So when the leaves start to come out, is that the equivalent of the tree version of rooting or not? Or you actually need it to be a further on stage, the chanata, the actual leaves are coming out. So teku. So we don't know the answer to that. Boi Rava Barav Chanan. So Rava Barav Chanan asks the next question. Chitin shezard bekarka. If I've got wheat that I plant in the ground, Omer matiron o ein Omer matiron. Okay, so I planted this wheat in the ground. It was last year's wheat, because that's why I'm planting it. It was seeds. And then I put it in the ground, and they were in the ground during the Omer. And it hadn't sprouted. And then after the Omer, I dig it up, and I say, you know what, I'm hungry. And I dig up the wheat, the kernels, and now I want to eat it.
So you preserved it, basically?
So, well, I mean, if it's in the ground, it was almost going to germinate, right? So it's not quite preserving it, but it did preserve, right? It stayed in the ground. I didn't bury it with the intent. I buried it to plant it. So, nevertheless, right? So the question is, when I dug it up, is it brand new and there was no Omer? Or is it last year's product, because it's a seed?
I'm thinking last year's product.
So let's see. Heichi dami. So what's going on here? I de ashrush, if it started to sprout, germinate, and the roots are growing from it, so tanina, we already learned that in a Mishnah. The idelo ashrush, that it's already in a Mishnah, it's already a new plant, and so therefore it's new from the new year. Idelo ashrush, if it hasn't taken root, tanina, we've already learned that as well. Ditnan, here's the Mishnah. Im hishrishu kodem laomer, if you plant seeds in the ground, and they started to sprout before the Omer, so then Omer matiron. Then the Omer says, then the Omer comes, and they are permissible, even if you didn't harvest them yet, right? As long as they already took root in the ground, so then you can eat them. The imlav, but if they have not taken root, asurin achi yavo Omer haba, then they're prohibited until next year, right? Even if it grows this year and harvest it, you got to store it until next year.
Who says it's going to be good, but
that is normally the way that it works with grain. Grain doesn't go bad that fast, right? It's not like a vegetable. So, lo tzricha. So no, I do need this. So here's the question. Dechatzdinhu v'sarinhu, right? What happens is he harvested this grain, and now he planted it kodim la'omer, before the Omer. V'asa Omer v'cholif alayhu, and now the Omer came while the seeds were in the ground. V'kamiboyle, and so now, right, now the question is like this. Mahu linakute umechum, can I dig them up and can I eat it? Right, I'm not talking about the plant that's growing, that I don't have a question about. If it took root before or after, that's what matters. This is the seed that was a final product, but now I planted it, right? Keman deshadya bekada damya, is putting it in the ground the same thing as putting it in a container, right? If I just put it if I put the seeds in a box, obviously it would be the Omer would be effective, right? But visharinhu Omer, and therefore the Omer is effective on it. Odilma batilhu legabe ara. Once you put it in the ground, it's now a seed, and so now it's not, and it hasn't taken root. It's not valid for the previous year, and it becomes batil, and you can't eat it. So yesh lahen. So the question is, okay, so now yesh lahen ona o ein lahen ona. So let's figure out. In order to determine this, what we're really asking is, what is the seed? Is the seed planted, or is the seed still a seed? So how do we know whether the seed is seed or whether it's planted?
the seed is planted when you see the roots coming out of it.
The seed can be planted even before the roots come out of it, right? As long as the question we're asking is, if you put it in the ground, is it now ground? So here's the way that you can tell. Items that, when you sell a item to somebody else, there's a rule called onah. We learned about it in Bava Metzia. Onah is that I am not allowed to overcharge or be undercharge for something that I'm selling. If I sell you a product that is worth $5 and I charge you $5.50, right? Then the sale's valid. That's fine, because people are not that worried about any change that's less than a sixth of the price.
That's the restaurant, because your restaurant you buy meat for $150 and you charge that much more for it.
And that's a presumed profit because the value added is a different story, right? I'm talking about the exact same product, right? I'm going to sell you, here's a cup of coffee. I just went into the store, I bought it for $5, I walk outside, and then I want to sell it for $5.50, make 50-cent profit. So can I do that? The answer is yes. Because less than a sixth, we presume that people are willing to overpay or underpay for convenience or whatever it is. If I go out and I say, here's a $5 cup of coffee, and I go outside and I sell it for $10, that is not allowed. And if I do that, the sale is canceled, and I can get my money back, right? I turn back, hand back the coffee, and the sale is canceled. It's not valid sale.
You're ripping the other person off at the same time.
Correct. That's called ona. Well, that's not right. That is ona. Then, if the sale is exactly a sixth, then the sale is valid, but the person has to return the money, has to give the extra money over, right? So if I charge you $6 instead of $5, I owe you $1, right? And that's how ona works. Now, ona only works on movable property. Ona doesn't work on land because land, the value of land is whatever you're willing to pay for it, right? If I sell you a house that's worth $1 million for, or whatever it's worth, for a fifth more or a sixth more, well, now that's the value of the land. So there is no ona when it comes to land.
There's no ono when it comes to RVs.
Not sure about that.
It's like
It is a movable object,
Yeah.
so therefore there would be no problem, right? It would be like a car. So now, here's the issue. I want to take a look, these seeds that were planted in the ground. Is there a chiyuv ona or not? Because if there's ona on it, then they're seeds, in which case the omer is effective on them. And if there's no ona, then they're like the ground, in which case they're planted and the omer doesn't help it.
Let's say it could be an ona, because if you want to move it, you got to move it somewhere else.
Well, that's the thing, but you have to an extra step. I can also take dirt and I can move it, right? The point is that ground is considered one halachic entity and movable items are considered a different halachic entity. Okay, so heichi dami. So let's talk about the circumstances. There's some other details of the circumstances that are critical to know. Ilema da'amar le shadai ba shita. Let's say, how did the person sell it, right? He doesn't obviously have the seeds in his hand, they're planted. So what he does is, he goes to somebody, he says, I would like to sell you what I planted. He says, I put into the ground 6 core of wheat. Ve'asu sadi v'amri, and then witnesses come and say, we saw what he put into the ground. Delo shada be'ela chamisha. He only put 5 core into the ground. Okay, so now there's a question. So there you go, there's ona. So the question is that an ona? And is the sale, does he have to return the money? Yeah, but here's the reason why that wouldn't be the case. Because Ve'amar Rava says, Kol tovar shebamida uveshebamishkal v'shebaminyan, afilu pachos mikdei ona choser. He says that wouldn't be the question because in this circumstance, since you're selling a precise quantity of something, 6 core or 5 core, and he specifies, the sale is going to be invalid anyway. Imagine, even when it comes to land or property, if I say I'm going to sell you, an acre of land, and then I buy it, and then I come back and I measure it, and it's only a half an acre, the sale's no good. Because I was promised an acre and you sold me half an acre. If you promised me 5 and I said I'm going to buy, if you promised me 6 and I bought 6 and it turned out it was only 5, of course the sale's invalid. That's because we specified the amount. If the amount is what changes, for sure the sale's canceled. And that doesn't matter. That's not dependent on the ona rules. So that's not a great way to make the case. Ella, rather, the case is like this. D'amar le shadai ba kedeboila. He says, here's the land. I put the appropriate amount of seeds here. Whatever I think is the right amount of seeds. And the asusadi and witnesses come. V'amri delo shadai kedeboila. No, he skimped. He put less than he needed to. So it wasn't a precise measurement. It was an estimation. Therefore, the rules of ona are going to apply. Yesh lahen ona. Is there ona or not? Is it like they are just seeds I'm selling in a container? And so yesh lahen ona. and it has ona, odilma batil lehu legabe ara, or is it now nullified because it's in the ground and there's no ona? Okay, so that's the next question, right? So that's the question. Next question. Nishboin alehen o ein nishboin alehen. These seeds that you plant in the ground, right, can you swear? Another difference between whether seeds are in the ground, what something is ground, land, or not land is you don't ein nishboin al karka.
We'll leave it.
You don't swear when there's a court case about land. Right? You can't. If somebody says you sold me 1 acre of land, and I say no, half. That's not a case of moda miktas, or of accepting part of the claim because it's on land. There's no deoraisa oaths. There's no oaths taken on land, but on monetary value items there is. So the question is, if there's a oath concerning these seeds, then does he swear or not? Are they like seeds that are in a drawer? And they're like movable objects. Nishboy and lamb, you could take an oath on them. Or are they part of the ground now? And therefore like ground. So ein nishboy and lamb, you don't swear on them. So teku. So we're unclear. So we're unclear 3 different rules, of practical rules, about whether these seeds are part of the ground or not. Whether omer is effective on them, whether you can swear on them, and whether there's ona on them. Okay, next question. Boy Rami Bar Chama. Rabbi Chama's next question. Chitin bigloli bakar usaorin bigloli behemamahu. If I've got grain, right, and it's found in the manure of an animal, right? The animal ate the grain and did not digest it fully. And so in its feces you find pieces of grain. What is the rule? Is that food or is that not food?
I don't think it's not food because it's contaminated by the...
So lemai. So we're going to, first of all, what practical difference does it make if it's food or not? Right? Question is, if I gather enough of it together, does it become tuma? Can I transmit tuma of food with it, right? If I need to be able to have a kibetza quantity, an X volume of food, then that item can receive tuma and transmit tuma. Tanina, we learned in a brisa, chitin sheberi'i bakar useorin shebegloli behema. If I have wheat or barley in the animal's refuse, chishev alehem la'achila. If a person says, you know what, I would like to eat them, ein matami tumas ochlin. So then they are not able to transmit tuma because they're not food in that way.
Even though it's contaminated in the feces?
So I guess you have to wash it off, right?
The famous shiloh that they had about when the coffee beans that were swallowed directly by donkeys, they were like valuable.
Yes.
They're asking if that's kosher now. Because they went to a tummy animal.
That's correct, yes. Likdon le'achila, however, if you gathered it together and you decided to make it into food, right? You washed it off, gathered it, cleaned it off. As they said, they would process these beans, coffee beans, and that sort of mitame tumas ochlin. So it would, in fact, transmit tuma. So we see that it is food. Ella, the question is like this. Menachos, can you use this grain in order to offer it as a korban? Pshita delo, that's obviously you cannot do. Why? Because the pasuk says, Hakrivehu no lifechasecha, in Malachi, the Jews are criticized for bringing inferior quality items to the Mizbeach for a korban. They say, why don't you bring it to your flesh and blood king and see if he wants it, right? This is inferior quality stuff. It's a disgrace to Hashem. So therefore, you for sure can't bring it. So what's the case that it makes a difference? So lotzricha, dinaktinhu vizar'inhu. The question is, I took it and I planted it. Right, had these seeds, and I planted them. Now that it's planted, it grows, and now I want to, from the crop that grows from these seeds, I'd like to bring a mincha from the new crop. So what happens? Mishum de mi'isusahu, if it comes from something which is disgusting, so kevan dizar'inhu ozdo le'mi'isusaihu, but now you planted it. So it's not disgusting anymore, it's a new plant. So therefore, it's not a problem. Odilma or mishum kechishusahu. What's the reason why it becomes invalid for being a mincha? Is it because it's disgusting, or because after it's digested, some of the nutrients from the grain are absorbed by the animal, and it becomes an inferior seed? And the result of the inferior seed,
it's like a virus.
right? The plant that grows is going to produce inferior quality product. And so therefore you can't bring the product as a mincha either. Teku, so we leave that one as a question. Boi Rami Bar Chama asks the next question, fourth and final question. Peel shabola kefifa mitris. We're waiting for the elephant in the room. Here it is, right? An elephant eats a basket, a woven basket of palm fronds, right? It's got the, take it, not France, not from France, fronds, right? Like the palm tree things, right? They would weave it together and they made a big basket out of it. And an elephant decided that looks delicious and he eats it. Vehekia derech beis harehi, and it doesn't digest smoothly in the elephant and it poops it out, right? And so now, what's the halacha about this basket? Right? Is the basket a basket or is it not a basket? Lamai. So what practical halachic difference does this make? Ilema lemivtal tumasa. The question is, let's say the basket was tamei before. Now that it comes out of the elephant, is it tamei anymore? So tanina. Right? So that we already know that in a Mishnah. Kol akilim yordin lidei tumason b'machshava. When a utensil becomes, if somebody thinks about this utensil and says, it isn't a utensil anymore, right? Right. For example, if a person decides, right, he's got a piece of leather and he says, I'm going to make a table out of this, right? So there's no other item, right? It's just, here it is. There it is. Now, as soon as he decides he's using it, it becomes a utensil. As soon as I decide I'm going to use it the way that it is, it's a utensil. Vein olin mi tumason el b'shinui ma'aseh. But now I'd like if this table became tamei. Now I say, nah, it's not a table anymore. Now it's something else. You can't do that. The only way to change it to make it not become tamei is you have to make a physical change to the item, right? Break it or change it in some way.
Change a leg.
Change it in some way, right? Take a leg off, then it becomes not a table anymore, right? Then it becomes not tamei anymore. So therefore, also this elephant basket, right? The tuma's not gone because it didn't change. The basket's the same basket it was once you clean it off. So lo tzricha debala hutzin. What happens is the elephant swallowed branches. V'avdinu kafifa mitzris. And then after the branches came back out, then they used the branches in order to make a basket out of it. Mihava ikul. So the question is, v'havalei kikli galalim. The question is, do we consider the palm branches to be feces in itself? If it is, then what is this basket made out of?
Feces.
Feces. Now,
Wear gloves if you want.
The rule is that if I make a utensil, they would make pottery and utensils. They would dry up. Chips, right? As they call the manure of animals. Mix it with some clay, and then they would fire it in an oven, and you can make a utensil out of it. Right? It's not a fancy utensil, but it's a utensil. And it's kekli adama. It has the status of an earthenware utensil, ve'ein mekabel tuma, and it cannot become tamei, because as a earthenware utensil, it cannot become tamei. So now you've got this advantage. You've got this frond basket that has no ability to accept tuma. So that's useful. Damarmar, kli avanim, if I've got a stone utensil, kli glalim, or a utensil made out of manure, kli adama, or a earthenware utensil made out of dirt, not earthenware, not clay, but made out of dirt, a mekabel tuma, it cannot receive tuma, lo midivrei Torah, lo midivrei sofrim, not on a Torah level or on a rabbinic level. O dama lo have equal. Or no, it's still a palm frond, and therefore it's still a regular utensil. So tifshut mehad da amar ula mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yehotzadok. So let's say we can make the answer from what Ula said in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yehotzadok. Maisa, there was a story. Ubalu ze'evim shnei tinokos be'ever hayarden. There was an unfortunate story that two wolves attacked children on the other side of the Jordan River. Right, and the wolves had the flesh of these children, and after the wolves threw up the flesh, and now they've got this corpse flesh. So the question is does it have tumas mace on it? Is the flesh tumas mace? So ba ma'isa livnei chachamim. So the story came before the chachamim v'tiharu es habasar, and they said the flesh doesn't create tuma because it's already partially digested. It's not corpse tuma anymore. So deshani basar derokich. So the answer is that doesn't prove anything because that's meat. The flesh is soft. So once it goes through the digestive system of an animal, for sure, that's not flesh anymore. But the fronds, the basket, that doesn't get absorbed. It's still the same thing as it comes out. Okay, v'liv shot miseifa. So let's come from the end. The end of it says v'timu es hantzamos. They said the bones that came out from the wolves, that was tamei. So therefore, that's not soft. So therefore, it is tamei. That can't prove anything from there either, because shani atzamos dakushe tfei. Bones are overly hard compared to the fronds. So you can't. The palm leaves can't prove anything. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the question of shtei lechem. New question. Boi Rabbi Zera, we're in Samach Tes Amud Beis. Boi Rabbi Zera, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 lines or so. Probably about that. Boi
69b2.
right.
Arch roll.
Boi Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera asked the following question: Chitin sheyardu be'oven. Okay, I got some wheat that falls out of the sky. Rashi tells us, how did that happen? It happened because there was a water spout. A ship was off the coast, and the wheat got blown up into this tornado and blew it. And then when it rained, the wheat comes flying out of the sky.
Was the EF1 or EF5?
I don't know, but it was definitely strong enough to be able to pick up the wheat and deposit it someplace else. Tosfos says that no, that can't be, because this would be a problem, because we're going to talk about whether we can use it for the shtei lechem or not. Then we would be saying it came from outside of Eretz Yisrael, and of course we would be able to use it as part of the shtei lechem. I'm not sure but why necessarily. If it came from off the coast, maybe it was from a boat, from something that grew in Eretz Yisrael, right? Okay, but it could have been grain that was grown in Eretz Yisrael, put on a ship, and then it got picked up and put back in Eretz Yisrael. I don't know, maybe, right? So that's, Tosfos doesn't like it. Tosfos says he likes the answer, it's miraculous wheat. It's like mun from Shemayim. The wheat it rained and grain came out of Shemayim. Okay? So the question is, Mahu, what is the halacha with this grain? So the question is, Lamai, what is Rabbi Zera asking? What question is that? What's it for? Ilim and Menachos, if you're talking about using this grain as part of a mincha offering, amai lo. So what would be the problem? It's grain, just use it. Ella, l'shtei lechem. The question is, can it be used for the shtei lechem? Mai, what's the halacha? It went to Shemayim. Mimosh vosechem amar rachmana, lafuki dechutz laaretz dilo. Is it? It has to be mimosh vosechem. And this came from the sky. So therefore, it's not mosh vosechem. It comes from outside of Eretz Yisrael, right? Doesn't count. Aval de'ovim shapir dami. But if it comes from the sky, from clouds, so that would be okay, because it doesn't come from chutz laaretz. Came from the sky over Eretz Yisrael. O dilma mimosh vosechem dafka. Or maybe it means it has to grow from the ground, right? Va'afilo de'ovim namilo. And if it comes from the sky, then it doesn't count. Okay, that's the question. Umi ikekehai gavna. Time out. That never happens. Wheat comes from the sky. That never happens. So the answer is in. Yeah, it does happen, right? Kida'adi taya, like what happened to Adi the Arab. Nechisa le rum kizva chite bitlosa parse. It rained wheat into his field, a tefach high over his 3 parsa field. He just got lucky and it just poured grain out of the sky.
Did it put through his umbrella?
I don't know. He was inside, I would suppose. I hope. Boi Reb Shimon ben Pazi. Reb Shimon ben Pazi asks the following question. Shibolis shevia shlish. Okay, I've got a bundle of grain, right? I've got an ear of grain, and it increases by 1/3 from its original size. When it comes to ears of grain, right, they expand in size. They don't just grow new branches, so they expand in size if you replant them. So if it goes another 1/3, kodem omer, before the omer, ve'akara, and then you pull it out, ushesala le'achar omer, and then you replant it after the omer. So during the omer, it was unplanted, right? So now you replant it afterwards. V'hosifa, and now it grows even more. Mahu, what is the rule? Basar ikar azlinon. Do we go after the original crop, right? The original crop was grown 1/3 of the way, and so therefore it was already a crop and edible. So therefore Sharyeh Omer, the Omer has permitted it, and so therefore even if he plants it again and expands some more, that doesn't matter, right? It's still already permitted. So this plant is already permitted. Or do we say, look, more grew, and that's in this year. So we basically have a mixture of usr and mutter, and so therefore you have to you got to wait until next year to be able to eat this ear. Tifshut le mehad amar Rabbi Yavo amar Rabbi Yochanan. Let's try to bring an answer from that which Rabbi Yavo said in Rabbi Yochanan. Yolda, a young plant sapling, right? You have a young sapling, right? It hasn't already gone through 3 years of orla. Shesibcha bizikena, and you graft it into a older tree. Okay, so now that is already past the orla stage, right? This is an older tree; it's 10 years old, so there's no, if any fruit that would grow from that tree doesn't need orla. So uba peros, and now fruit grow from this new branch. Afilu hosif b'masayim, even if the small branch, right after the grafting, grows 200 times as much. Normally, when it comes to orla, the bittul is 200 to 1. So even though this grew 200 times, aser, it's still aser, because it's still from the branch that was orla. So you see that the branch, right, you're going to prove from Rabbi Yochanan that we're going to, we go after the original, right, the original item, we don't go by how it increased in size. So Amar of Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, so Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says to Rabbi Yonasan, Batshel Shesolo Bekerem. Okay, what about an onion that was planted in a vineyard, right? So now the onion becomes prohibited because of kilayim, right? You're not allowed to plant vegetables in a vineyard. So if it grows, then it is going to become aser. V'nekar hakerem. So now you uproot the vineyard and you leave the onion there. Afilu hosif b'masayim aser. Even if the onion grows some more, it remains prohibited. Well, that means, right? Again, you're going to be able to go after the original, right? The original item was prohibited, so even if it grows more in a permitted way, it remains prohibited. Okay, so that's another proof. So he gufa kami boile. So he's actually, this was his real question. Mifshat pshita lehu l'rabbanan debasar ikar azlinon. So the rabbanan, the question is, it seems from these circumstances, the two situations that you quoted were that the item is prohibited because the original item is prohibited no matter how much it grows. So were they saying that we're very clear we're going after the original item and lo shnad lekula lo shnad lechumra, so it doesn't matter whether it's going to become permitted or prohibited, right? In the two cases that you just brought, the onion stayed prohibited, the branch stayed prohibited. But I'm asking a case where the grain was permitted because the Omer permitted it, and now it grows some more. Are we saying that it goes by the original item because it always goes by the original item? It doesn't matter whether the original item makes it permitted or the original item makes it prohibited. Whatever the original item was, it stays. O dilma sevuki misapkilahu. Or are we saying the rabbis weren't sure what to make of it? Is it go after the original or does it go after the new? So what did they say? They just said it was aser, l'chumra amrinan, l'kula lo amrinan. Therefore, in the case of the onion, in the case of the grafted branch, they just said it's aser, stay away from it. In the case of the ear of grain that grew, they would say, you know what? We don't know. Stay away from that too. So maybe it's always aser. So we're not sure. The question that they're asking is, I understand that the Rabbanan say it's aser. I just didn't know whether they're saying it's aser because we go after the original item or it's aser because I don't know if it goes after the original item. So therefore, it's always going to be aser.
I would say because it's questionable.
Teku. The answer is we don't know. Boy Rava. Rava asks question. Right? You can ask Elyonim. Le'inyan meiser mai. So the question is, right? This item grows, right? So does it need to have meiser or not? Right? Do we go after the original item or after the addition? So hechi dummy, what is the case? Kagon de amdinhu ve'asrinhu. What happens is he measured it, he harvested it, he measured it up, and he took meiser off for it already. Vishaslidhu, then he plants it again, vosifaluhu, and now it grows some more. Im timta lomar loaz linan basar ikar. If you say we don't go by the original item, vitosefes boy yasure. So now the additional part needs to be have more meiser taken off of it. So ikar mai. So what about the original item? Right? Do we say that now that more has added on, the more makes it so that the original item is now gone and we have to take meiser off on the entire thing again? Or do you only have to take meiser off the new part? So Amar le Abaye, so Abaye answers, Maishna mikol chiti usiri de alma. Why is that any different from any time? How does grain grow? You take a wheat kernel, you plant it in the ground, and then it grows into a plant, and you get more wheat kernels. Every wheat kernel that grows needs to have Trumas and Maasros taken off of it. You don't say, hey, the original wheat kernel doesn't need Trumas and Maasros taken off of it because I had one wheat kernel, so one doesn't need it. Of course, all of it grows needs it. So why is this any different than planting wheat ever? So Amar Le, so Rava answers back, Davar Shazaru Kala Lomi Boili says, because when a seed germinates, it disappears, right? The seed becomes the plant, and so therefore, that's not the question. Ella kikmi boili davar sheinzaro kalamai. My question is, if I've got a plant that I put in the ground and it expands, it's still the original product, but it expands. That's a different question, right? See the difference between a seed that disappears and a plant that expands. So tifshut le mehoda omar Rabbi Yitzchak amar Rabbi Yochanan. So let's try to bring an answer to this question from that which Rabbi Yitzchak said to Rabbi Yochanan. Litra botzel, right? If I've got a litra of onion, shetikno uzaro, and I took Trumas and Maasros off of it, and then I replanted. Now an onion, right, expands. Right? It grows more onions from the original onion. The original onion doesn't disappear. Misaser lefi kulo. Nevertheless, you have to take Truma and Maasros off of the entire onion. So therefore, you see that the original also needs to be redone. So that should be a proof. No. Hasam hainuz riyaso. That's different because that's how you plant onions. Right? If you want to grow an onion, you take an onion and you plant it in the ground. That's how you grow more onions. So that's different. Hacha lav hainuz riyaso. But here, taking an already harvested plant and replanting it, that's not how you normally do it. Normally you take a seed and you grow a new plant. So this is not the normal way. So even if it grows, I have a question. So Rabbi Chanina bar Manyumi Abaye. So Rabbi Chanina bar Manyumi said to Abaye, Otzis she'enu nokov mahu. Okay, new question that's in a similar vein. Let's say I have a pot, right, that has no holes in it. It's a flower pot that has no holes. And I would like to take Trumas and Maasros from the produce that grows from the pot that has no holes for produce that was grown in a container that had holes. The container that has holes is in the ground, right? Can I take Trumas and Maasros from the pot that has no holes on the produce from the pot that has holes?
Do you transfer it from one pot to the next?
No. We're saying this is in this pot and this is in this pot. Now I pull as I harvest the grain, right? I'm saying that the one that here is in this pot that is not attached to the ground. Can I take Trumas and Maasros on the one that is attached to the ground?
I'll say no.
So the question is, so it seems like, ilo nokov, halo nokov. So he says, look, if it's in a pot that's not attached to the ground, so then of course you can't, it's exempt from Trumas and Maasros. Only things that grow in the ground are required to take Trumas and Maasros from them. If you do hydroponics, right, hydroponics,
in a greenhouse,
right, or in a greenhouse, as long as it's not in the ground in the greenhouse, right? If you grow it in pots, you don't have to take Trumas and Maasros. Okay? So, Dilma Chazer v'nikvo kamart. We're saying no. Here's what happens. He has it in a pot that has no holes. It's growing. And then at some point, you put some holes in the bottom. And now it grows a little bit more. So now that's our question, similar to the question we had before. The original wheat that grew didn't need Trumas and Maasros because it was grown in a pot that had no holes. But now that you put holes in it, it grows some more. So the additional part needs Trumas and Maasros taken from it. So now what happens? So, do we say, hey, this is all one plant, right? It's all one thing. So therefore, it was all connected together. And therefore, we're going to consider the main part as if it's planted in a pot that has holes in it, and you're going to be chayav in Trumas and Maasros. So, Hasam, but there, Shnei Zrios Ninhu. There, as far as so we're saying by the plant that you put holes in it, of course you're going to take Trumas and Maasros on the whole thing. Because once you put holes in it, now the whole plant becomes a plant that's growing in that pot. But that's not similar to the case where you plucked the plant out of the ground and then replanted it again, because that's two separate acts of planting. The original act of planting, it was plucked. Now that it's harvested, it doesn't require Trumas and Maasros. Now that I repluck it in, I'm taking something that's not Chayav and Trumas and Maasros, and I'm adding to it, the question stands and remains unresolved. Okay. Boi Rabbi Yavo asked the following question. Shibolas shemircha bakri. If I've got a ear and I have smoothened it in the pile, right? So now ushasala v'kara Allah Hashem. And now I then put it into the ground, and now I call it Trumas and Maasros b'mechubar, while it is attached to the ground, mahu. Does that work or not? It's now been replanted, was harvested before, it was chayav and Trumas and Maasros. Now I put it back in the ground, and I say, this is going to be Truma. Can that work?
No, you can't.
Kevan de mircha tavla law, do we say that once it got harvested, so now it's done, and now it's tevel, and kikara lashem kadshalah. So now when he calls it and he says this is now truma, it works, it's effective. Odilma or kaven shesala is like Yehuda wants to say. Once you replant it again, pakalativ lemina, it stops being tevel again, and so now you can't make it trumas and maasros again. Amar le Rabbanan la Abaye. So the Rabbanan said to Abaye, Im kain matzinu truma b'mechubar lekarpukar. If that's the case, if you were able to make this into truma, then aren't we establishing that there's a circumstance where you can have truma and something that is attached to the ground? Utnan. And we learned in a Mishnah, Lo matzinu truma b'mechubar lekarka. Mishnah says that there's never a case where truma is effective when anything attached to the ground. So clearly, in this case, the answer should be that truma is not effective. Amar le, so he says, no, that's not what that Mishnah means. Kitanya hi, right, or it's a brisa, right? That brisa, I think it's a Mishnah, right? That's talking about le'inyan ichayuve misa v'chomesh. That is a question of if I eat this truma, right, or b'mezid, and now I'm chayav misa because I ate truma, or if I consume it b'shogeg, and now I have to pay it back and add a fifth, all those punishments. So then the question is, do those punishments apply? To eat tolish v'achil, if it is plucked out of the ground, so tolishu, so then it's plucked. V'igachin v'achil, now, if you bend down and you eat it while it's attached to the ground, but ladato, so that's not how you eat grain, attached to the ground. Therefore, that's not considered eating. We have a rule, right? If you are going to inject yourself with pig fat, right? That's not eating. Therefore, it's not chayiv. You're not liable for eating in that circumstance. So that's what's going on here. The issue isn't whether yes, this plant is truma, but you're not chayiv if you eat it without plucking it. That's what that Mishnah means. If there's no such thing as it being truma while it's in the ground, but once you pluck it out, it's truma, even if you don't redesignate it, because you designate it while it is in the ground. That is effective. Umayshna, why would that be any different when you bend down and you eat a plant that's not eating? Midechsiv apinkasa de ilfa, from that case what was written on the tablet of Ilfa. Ilfa had taken notes, and he said as follows: Beitse nivlas ha'of hator. You have eggs. You have a bird, chicken gets hit by a truck, and now you've got a dead chicken. It's a nevela, right? It's not kosher. Okay. The rule by a nevela is that if you eat a nevela, as soon as you swallow it, it transmits tuma.
What happens if the chicken gets hit by a truck and as it's getting hit, the chicken lays an egg?
That's what's going on here. This chicken is laying eggs, and it also has eggs still inside of it. Okay, so you take this chicken and it's got eggs inside of it. Miktzosan b'chutz, the ones that it was in the middle of laying, the one that's outside of it. So, and miktzosan bifnim, and some of them are still inside of the chicken. Mi bifnim, the eggs that are still inside the chicken, mitamim begodim abeis habliya. So those are part of the chicken. Therefore, if you eat them as part of the chicken, so then they're going to create tuma, like the chicken does. Mi bachutz, however, if they are outside of the chicken, the eggs that it already laid before it got hit by the truck, e mitamim begodim abeis habliya. So those are regular eggs, and they're not tameh, and you can go ahead and eat those, right? So now, the question is, you wouldn't eat an egg, right? You just said that bending over and eating and like sucking like the plant is not eating. Why is it that if I open up the dead chicken and I swallow the egg from the dead chicken, right? Suck the egg right out of the chicken, why is that eating? That shouldn't be eating either.
You can still get sick because it's salmonella.
So the answer, well, yes, that's true too, but I mean, I guess. I'm not sure if an egg's not laid yet, whether it can get salmonella or not. That's a good question. Talush avidi inchi da'achli hachi. The answer is that something that is separated from the ground, right, people will eat from it, right? And therefore, a chicken, even though the egg is not detached from the chicken is detached from the ground. So somebody will eat the chicken like that, eat the eggs right out of the chicken that way. That's considered eating. However, but if the plant is actually still attached to the ground, lo avidi nishdachli. People don't eat that way. That's the difference. So that's going to be the difference. Amar Rav Tavyumi bar Kisna Amar Shmuel. Rav Tavyumi bar Kisna said the name of Shmuel, Hazora kil ayin be'otzitz she'enu nakov. If somebody plants in a vineyard in a pot that has no holes on the ground, osir, right? That is prohibited. Now, it's not prohibited on doraisa level because it's not in the ground, but it is prohibited because it's very similar to the prohibition. Amar Abaye says, Bishlama iyashma inan loke makas mardos derabanan shapir. So I understand what Shmuel is trying to tell me. Shmuel is trying to tell me that if you plant it in this pot and you eat it, so you're going to get lashes from the chachamim.
Again, so like 30 lashes, right?
39. Ella also my kamashmalan. But just to tell me that there's a prohibition, why is he telling me that? Demidrabanan havyazriya. Is he just trying to tell me that midrabanan, planting in a pot with no holes, is considered to be planting? Tanina, we already learned that in a Mishnah. Taram min she'eno nakov al hanakov. If I have this circumstance that we discussed, where I have a pot that has no holes and a pot that has holes, so the pot that has holes, the grain that's in that pot is obligated in truma midoraisa. The pot that has no holes is not obligated in truma midoraisa. What if I took truma and I said the pot in the pot that has no holes, and I said this is truma? So the answer is the pot that has no holes becomes truma midorabanan. But the pot that has the pot has no holes becomes truma. The pot that has holes, though, is not acceptable. It still needs more truma taken off because it wasn't real truma. It's only derabanan truma.
If you make an announcement saying this pot's being used for truma,
if that's when it becomes truma, right? It becomes asur miderabanan. So tara min she'eno nakov al nakov. If you take from the pot that has no holes, but then truma, so then it becomes truma. But min hanok al hanok truma, it is effective. It's truma v'yachzor v'yitrom. Then you have got to go ahead and make new truma on the pot that has holes on it because it didn't get accepted. But you see that it's considered to be planting midrabanan on a rabbinic level. Therefore, the only thing that Shmuel could be adding to the fact that when you have kilayim is that you actually are getting malchus for it. Not only is it rabbinically prohibited to plant in a prohibited way in a pot that has no holes on it, but also you get malchus, you get lashes for it. Okay, can stop here.